Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 10th webinar of today, a webinar that will talk about standards in support of the EU Ecodesign Framework. Again, a webinar in a kind of special circumstances because the speaker and myself are not in the same room, but all should be fine this morning. The first slide should be on your screen already. So my name is Els, and I will be the webinar moderator of today. As usual, you're all muted during the presentation, so please use the question panel for entering your questions, questions that will then be taken care of after the presentation. As usual, should your question remain unreplied, we will create a Q&A report that we'll upload on the website. You will also receive in your inbox today the presentation and the link to the recording of this webinar so that you can share it with your colleagues or contacts that might be interested in the topic. Should you be on Twitter, please feel free to tweet about the topic. We are at Standards for EU and we have a dedicated hashtag 1010 webinars. So please let me give you some moment to introduce to you the speaker of today. It's my colleague Mercedes Miracosta, who is project manager at the Energy and Living team, Standardization and Digital Solutions at the Sensenelec Management Center. So please, Mercedes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Els, and good morning, everybody. So my name is Mercedes, and I work at the Sensenelec within the Energy and Living unit, where I'm responsible for, among others, eco-design and energy labeling. So today's webinar, I would like to shed the light on the smooth development of the European standards in support of eco-design and energy labeling regulations. So in this context, the content for today's meeting, we will start by briefly describing the legal framework to continue with the Sensenelec activities, upcoming standardization requests in this field, also some tips on how to draft annexes Set A and Set Z, and to finalize some words about the assessment process and official journal citation of the eco-design and energy labeling harmonized standards. So, as you know, in the European Union, the energy-related products are regulated by the Ecodesign Framework Directive, which is the directive that sets the framework requiring manufacturers to improve the environmental performance of their products, and on the other hand, by the Energy Labeling Regulation, that enables consumers to make a better and also a more rational use of energy by informing the consumers about the energy efficiency of the products. So the Ecodesign Directive and the Energy Labeling Regulation give the European Commission the power to set concrete and also compulsory energy efficiency requirements on energy-related products that are placed in the European market. However, these requirements are set on individual product measures, which are adopted under these framework policies, where the Commission set the thresholds, the limits, maximum energy consumption, and any other parameters. So, as you might all be aware, there are a number of regulations that the Commission has adopted in 2019. So 10 are 10 eco-design implementing regulations, and 8 of these regulations are revising already existing requirements, where the ones highlighted in green, it means refrigerators with direct sales function and welding equipment, are regulated for the first time. This is for the new Ecodesign implementing regulations, but in addition, 6 of the product groups that are subject to new and also revised Ecodesign requirements are also covered by new energy labeling rules. As you might have heard, the Commission has decided to come back to the scale that goes from A to G. In addition, it is also important to highlight that for the first time, the eco-design measures are not only focused on the use phase of the energy-related products, but the new measures include also requirements for repairability and recyclability. So focus on the design phase and on material efficiency requirements too. So what's the role of the European standards? So just to recap a bit, the European Commission, as I mentioned, adopts product-specific regulations under the framework directives of the Ecodesign and energy labeling. And every 3 years, the European Commission decides which products could be regulated. Where this information appears, so this information is published in the European Commission Ecodesign Working Plan that is decided more or less every 3-4 years. So following the publication of these product-specific regulations, the European Commission requests CENELEC, the European Standardization Organizations, to develop ad hoc measurement methods for each of the regulated product groups. And the CENELEC technical committees are actually in charge of the development of harmonized standards that are providing the manufacturers with dedicated methods that enable them to measure the performance or energy efficiency of their products against the requirements which are in the product-specific regulations. So this is the workflow when a new product-specific regulation is normally adopted. So what are we doing at CENELEC? So back in 2012, we have established the Ecodesign Coordination Group, aiming at ensuring proper communication and also coordination between the technical committees that are developing standards in support of eco-design and energy labeling, and in addition to that, also between the CENELEC Management Center and the European Commission. So the Ecodesign Coordination Group is comprised of members and observers, and the members are mainly those technical committees that are impacted by ecodesign, also technical committees that are involved in the mandate 480 on energy performance buildings, among others. In case you are interested in taking part, I invite you to contact your national committee or your national standardization body. So a bit about the figures. So far, we have received 26 standardization requests to develop standards in support of ecodesign, and there are already around 165 published European standards that are not only new standards, but revised standards or amendments that have been developed by around 20 technical committees that are actively involved. The products covered so far are going from vacuum cleaners to tumble dryers or computers or computer servers, and as I was explaining, this is to be expanded based on the European Commission Ecodesign Working Plan. So the existing working plan finished in 2019, and the European Commission is already working in the upcoming Ecodesign Working Plan that will define which products will be regulated in the future. And what we already know is that the focus will be more on circular economy matters. So in this context, the Commission already launched the preparatory study that started in March 2020 and is expected to finish by December. So this will help and inform the Commission preparing the Ecodesign and Energy Labeling Working Plan from 2020 to 2024. I also added in the slides the link where you can get all the information and where the Commission will, or this I mean, all the information relevant to the preparatory study will be shared. So this will be accessible for everybody that is interested. So, as mentioned before, SENS and ELAC are developing standards at the request of the European Commission. So, taking into account that the Commission has adopted new measures, the Commission has also started to work on the development of new standardization requests, which are the ones that you can see on the screen. The first one on household dishwashers, washing machines, and household washer dryers. Another one on eco-design requirements for air-to-air conditioners, air-to-air heat pumps, and comfort pumps. Another one for servers and data storage products. Another one for refrigerating appliances with direct sales function. And last but not least, another standardization request on taps and showers. So for all of them, the relevant standardization request ad hoc group has been established. And what is the standardization request ad hoc group? So this is a group that the SENS and ELAC Management Center established as soon as we received a draft standardization request from the Commission. So this group will steer the preparatory work that is associated with the standardization request. In particular, in relation to issues relating the content, also the time frame given by the Commission to develop the standards, and the technical committees that might be impacted by these standardization requests. In addition, another role of the standardization request ad hoc group is to consider the comments that are received during the consultation with the SEN and SENELEC technical boards, and also to consolidate a SEN-SENELEC input to the Commission on the major issues that we have encountered into the draft text. So in this slide, I would like just to highlight the workflow for the Commission to adopt a new standardization request, and also highlight what are the main steps that remain super important for the SEN-SENELEC committee, being the drafting and consultation step, one of the most important. As I said, it is when we have a look to the content of the standardization, to the deadline given by the Commission for the adoption of the standards, and so on. So, in particular, your input as technical committees is expected during the drafting and consultation. And I'm quite sure that one of the questions will be, what is the timeline for the adoption by the European Commission on a standardization request? So this varies from one to another. It can be up to 1 year, or it can be done in a shorter period of time. So now I finish with a bit the legal framework and what is the situation as regards the standardization request. And I would like now to focus on some tips on how to draft annexes, the annexes set A for SEN and annexes set for SENELEC for eco-design and energy labeling harmonized standards. So just a bit of background, as you might all know, the annexes set A and set indicate the relationship between the requirements of the regulation and the applicable clauses of the standard. One important thing is that, especially in the context of eco-design and energy labeling, most of the times, the standards are in support of the eco-design and energy labeling regulation. So in this context, a standard should have as many annexes, set A or set, as regulations aim to cover. So in the case of SEN, this relationship, it is covered in the table set A, and in case of SENLAC standards, in the annex set, it is in the table set 1. And the template for eco-design and energy labeling is available on the SEN and SENLAC websites through the links that are available on the presentation. So here I would like to give you some tips on how to draft those annexes, and also how to draft the tables actually. So the tables, as I said, indicate the relationship between the requirements of the Ecodesign energy labeling regulation or the product information sheet or technical documentation and the specific clauses of the standard. So while the harmonized standard does not have to cover all relevant requirements, the annex set A set needs to be consistent with the coverage of the requirements. So we cannot claim the presumption of conformity to one requirement that it's not actually covered by the standard. And another important aspect that this table should be as explicit as possible. So provide a reference to specific clauses or even subclauses, as you can see in the example, rather than a whole section of the standard, as it could be more difficult to understand to which clauses relates the specific requirements. So this is a good example and also an annex that has been approved by the Commission. So another important aspect, when a requirement is only partially covered, it should also be clearly stated in the table to which extent the requirement is covered. And an example is this one. So basically, it is the equipment designed to be used with a remote condensing unit. It is not covered. So for this reason, you have the third column in the table to add some remarks or notes, such as this requirement is only partially covered in this standard. Also, if a specific clause of the standard is needed, even when it is needed in an indirectly way for the determination of the parameters, it needs to be linked in the annex set A or set Z. And last but not least, when the coverage is only provided by normative reference to another standard, please do not claim presumption of conformity in referring the standard. This is another aspect that is quite important to take into account. So I gave you some tips on how to draft standards, and now I would like to also show you some of the reasons for which the European Commission decided not to cite eco-design and energy labeling standards in the official journal of the European Union that has been offered and published by CENELAC. So one of the main issues that has been highlighted is that there are many copy-paste eco-design and energy labeling requirements in the normative parts of the standards. You know that according to CENELAC Internal Regulations Part 3, it is not allowed to use EU directives or regulations or any other legislation as normative reference. So reference to a standardization request, to the transitional method, or to the regulation should not be made in the normative parts of the standards. As you know, the eco-design and energy labeling standards should only contain the method and not the thresholds or limits. For that, we need to go to the relevant product-specific regulation. And this is one of the reasons for which the Commission rejects the standards that have been offered. Another aspect that the Commission has highlighted is the use of undated normative reference. So when you make reference to other standards that are relevant, this reference should be dated, and the aim is to avoid that an update of the reference standard lead to the withdrawal of the publication in the official journal of the European Union. And another aspect is the fact that, again, the items that are identified in the standardization request, or also in the transitional methods that are published by the Commission, needs to be taken in the standards, but again, no reference to these requirements in the standards should be made. Another thing is that, as you know, the parameters are identified in the standardization request, and CENSENELEC are developing standards, based on that requirements. If the scope of the standard is limited, the parameters that are mentioned in the standardization request need to be taken by, in another standard. So it is important that when you are developing the standards, all the parameters that are mentioned in the standardization request are taken up in the standards. And if I'm not mistaken, this was my last slide, indeed, regarding some tips and recommendations on how to draft the annexes. That is one of the major reasons for which the European Commission is actually rejecting harmonized standards in the field of eco-design and energy labeling. And now I would like to give you some hints about the assessment process for eco-design and energy labeling standards. So, as you might know, as from April 2018, there is in place a system, the HAS consultant framework that apply for other sectors such as machinery or construction. However, eco-design and energy labeling remain outside of the HAS consultant framework. So who is in charge of assessing the standards? The compliance to the requirements is assessed by the European Commission desk officers in three different DGs, that is DG Energy, DG Environment, and DG Grow, and also by consultants that are hired directly by the European Commission. And how this is done? This is done thanks to the interaction with the European Commission, that it's done through the CENSENELEC Management Center. So far, there is no mechanism. So we are currently having discussions with the European Commission to establish a more systematic mechanism to assess the standards developed in support of the eco-design and energy labeling regulations at drafting stage, inquiry stage, and formal vote stage. So once this mechanism is agreed and is in place, there will be relevant training webinars for you to adapt to this new mechanism that in addition will be an added value through the development of the standards in support of these regulations. One important thing is that the work items need to be linked to the relevant legislation and standardization requests in order to identify what are the work items that need to be assessed and that need to be offered. And also the work items need to be linked and registered in the work program of the standardization request that is approved by the European Commission. So please, it is super important that the technical committee work program is up to date, as this is the information that we have to link the projects to the relevant regulations. And another thing regarding the official journal citation, as you know, we are all aiming at ensuring that the conditions are fulfilled and that the standards are cited in the official journal. And one element that is essential are the annexes, set A and set Z. However, it is important to highlight that the final decision to cite a standard in the official journal of the European Commission is of the European Union, is responsibility of the European Commission. A particular aspect of the eco-design and energy labeling is that the standards are not cited under the Framework Directive, but under the product-specific regulations. And last but not least, since ENELAC, when the standards are published, offer those candidate harmonized standards to the European Commission for their citation on quarterly basis. So to finish, I would like that from today's webinar you take with you that annexes set A and set Z are key elements for the acceptance of those standards by the European Commission, to use the correct template and as many annexes as the number of regulations the standards are aiming to cover, even when the standard is not only in support of eco-design, but also in support or any other piece of legislation such as machinery or gas. Again, the annex needs to be consistent with the real coverage of the requirements, and eco-design and energy labeling standards should contain the method, the measurement method, but not the thresholds or requirements as these are contained in the relevant regulations. Last but not least, please keep updated the work program of your technical committee. Make sure that there is the link to the relevant regulations, and ensure that your standards contain the Annex Set A and Set Z. Otherwise, it will never be assessed and it will never be the standard cited. In case you have any question, of course, you can always get in touch with your project management at the ENELAC Management Center for further information. And with that, it is the end of my presentation. I hope you find it useful.